everything is being digitized faster and faster. Over 2.5 quadrillion bytes of data are being produced more in a day than the day previous. And to keep up with that demand, I mean, you have to constantly be building out data storage, data centers. An off-planet data center really is about providing more options and kind of continuity of operations for governments and for enterprise companies that really have valuable data that they have to be protecting at all costs. So think of it more like a Fort Knox for data versus, just your local bank.
Hello everyone, my name is Eugeniusz Romer. I'm from Układ Sił. Welcome to our YouTube channel. We are a foreign policy magazine from Poland. And today I have a great pleasure to interview Steve Eisele, president of Lonestar Data Holdings. Hello, sir.
Hi, great to be here.
And your company aims to send data centers to space, mostly to the moon. So my first question is, why would one do so? Like, we have a lot of space on Earth. I think that it's more cost effective to place them here. So why would you send them there?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of benefits to doing things in space, and they're not always better necessarily than Earth, but a lot of times they can enhance solutions and services that you provide on Earth. And data storage and data security certainly can be enhanced in outer space. And what Lonestar is trying to do is really take another element of security specifically for critical data. So data that governments, states, countries would value above, other more, let's say, genericized data. So things that are really critical to the functioning of government, maybe it's tax rules, maybe it's healthcare, and storing it in a solution in a data center or data security areas in a fleet of satellites, and then eventually on the moon. And the reason to do that really is because the Earth's data centers are constantly under attack, whether it's from hackers, bad actors from other nations, even human error. There's always issues that arise. And so part of securing our data infrastructure is also just having backup options. It's about finding ways to stay ahead of the game. You can't just become complacent with having a standard backup in a standard data center. Eventually, they can be hacked, or they can be maybe threatened by natural disasters, a hurricane, an earthquake, something of that nature. So an off-planet data center really is about providing more options and kind of continuity of operations for governments and for enterprise companies that really have valuable data that they have to be protecting at all costs. So think of it more like a Fort Knox for data versus, just your local bank.
Yeah, but when you think about space technology, I think it's way more fragile than this which we use on Earth. So, for example, you had many catastrophes in history in Apollo missions, for example. So is it really more safe to put some fragile data to the space? And you have also countries that already proved that they have capabilities of destroying, for example, satellites. Or is it like less likely that this data will be hacked in space? Is it like not possible for hackers from some countries to actually hack the data which is in space?
Absolutely. I mean,
because you're using radio waves, right? So
sure. Now, I mean, look, any data centers on Earth can be hacked, can be attacked, can be destroyed, right? So nobody's saying there's perfect solutions at all, but the way that you create a real data secure situation is by having backups and being able to distribute them in different areas. And companies and governments have looked at putting it underwater. They've looked at putting it high up on mountains, et cetera. But there's always challenges throughout. Now, what space affords you is a couple things. One, because of where we're placing the data centers, so they're going to be close to the moon and eventually on the moon, the sheer distance provides a huge challenge for people on Earth to be able to access that. And that goes also for other satellites. If you're trying to destroy a satellite, putting them up in a cislunar orbit near the moon, what's called an L1 orbit, makes it really complicated to start. So it's almost like putting something really far away and then building an extra moat around it and all these other obstacles. Furthermore, you're on an independent network. So we're connecting with our own ground stations that are also contained within a secure area. So that independent network creates that secure linkage that's also encrypted. And unlike kind of terrestrial networks, whether it's through Wi-Fi or cables or undersea cables, all of that can be hacked into, can be wrecked, Heck, the Chinese have been known to trawl in the ocean and pull some apart. So there's ways to get to them relatively easily. And the sheer distance and that you're creating from the Earth to a center in space really is the first line of security that you're engendering. But furthermore, it's not only about protecting the Earth's data, which is, of course, the main mission, but it's also looking forward into the future. So, I mean, if we're going to create a space economy and we're going to explore the moon and we're going to put habitats on the moon or Mars, and there's going to be rovers and landers up there talking to each other machine to machine, you have to develop a digital infrastructure to support that. There has to be a cloud on the moon. There has to be communications. And so by providing, also digital data security for in-space activities, lunar activities, et cetera, we're setting ourselves up to help support that future economy as it's developing.
So for now, how cost effective it is to send a data center to space? Because you have proven that this is possible already. So compared to, for example, building a data center here on Earth, as many companies do.
Yeah, so it's not exact apples to apples comparison because we're also talking about a small percentage of what we deem to be critical data. So data that, in particular, governments and enterprise companies value to a high degree. So it may not be your kids' iPhone photos that we're going to store up there right away. Eventually, we want to get there. So we're really focusing on kind of government solutions to start. And with that said, when you compare kind of like the capital cost of building a satellite or multiple satellites and the amount of data we can store, believe it or not, we're actually very comparable to what you would call like a hot data transfer rate, commercial rate. So it's not too far off what you would find here on Earth, but you get the benefits of the extra data security and, of course, for space exploration purposes and for governments that are looking to build out more data and digital infrastructure for in space, you have that other benefit as you go forward with new missions.
So I assume your future customers would be, for sure, governments, right? And so far they are, right? The state of Florida, for example.
Yeah, so the state of Florida is a public example. We're also working with other international governments as well, which we haven't quite announced. But going forward, we anticipate certainly governments, so civil governments, military agencies, as well as, honestly, large commercial enterprise groups that also store data, provide backup data, cloud services, et cetera.
Social platforms?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, really any platform. I mean, also eventually large banks, things of that nature will come into play. So, I mean, everything is being digitized faster and faster. Over 2.5 quadrillion bytes of data are being produced more in a day than the day previous. And to keep up with that demand, I mean, you have to constantly be building out data storage, data centers. And of course, they can be incredibly vulnerable. There's a lot of backdoor ways that people can access your data, hack your passwords, et cetera, et cetera. And this is one way that we're looking to keep people and governments' data safe. But also looking forward to the future, which is building out and supporting digital infrastructure for the space economy.
Okay. I think one may say that this is some kind of marketing, right? So if you're a startup or a company in space industry, you need a lot of capital, so you need to attract investors. And for example, you need to have a catchy goal to show them, right? For example, SpaceX is going to establish colonies on Mars. And that sounds like very inspiring. So you're planning to build data centers on the moon. So is this like more marketing or a real purpose?
It's a real purpose. Certainly, there's an element of visionary side to it that has to be explained. And nobody thinks that we can build something on the moon overnight. I mean, there's challenges with that undoubtedly. However, with a step-by-step process, you certainly can show how you can get there. And there's nothing that will stop us from putting up data storage network in space in the coming years. This is understood technology. Where we come in is really where we're locating it, how we encrypt it, and how we secure it on its own independent network. But next steps going to the moon is certainly possible, especially as you see the progress being done over the last decade in and of itself with the lunar landers and the plans to explore the moon. But people have to be thinking about the basics, which is how do we communicate? How do we store that data? We can't always relay it back and forth to Earth. And so thinking about how we plan that is part of our process. And then eventually we want to be part of the lunar economy.
All right, so let's discuss this technology, because obviously modern spacecrafts are full of microchips, but this is like really fragile technology, and plenty of microchips which are in a data center, right, in a database. So how do you send it to space safely? Because I don't know, you cannot take your iPhone and go to a sauna, right? Because it's too hot. So you are putting it on a rocket, which is like super hot during the launch, for example. So how this is possible?
Sure. Honestly, it's really no different than integrating other payloads onto satellites, the same way that they launch and are safely deployed in space. We'll do the same. Absolutely, we use SSD cards and things to store the data. So, keeping in mind radiation shielding and things of that nature are factored into the design. But ultimately, as new as space may feel to a lot of people, there's a lot of it that we understand today, that over 60 years essentially of trial and error and exploration and getting us to this point where we are today, we have a firm grasp of how to really safeguard our payloads and make them function in space for 5 to 10 years or longer. So I think this part is not as scary as it may sound.
All right, so you have already tested it twice, right? Once you send a payload to the ISS, and this year actually, at the beginning, you send the payload actually to the cislunar space. So how
actually
successful?
Landed on the moon even.
Oh, yeah. So how successful were these attempts?
So all of our attempts were incredibly successful. They were in line with kind of the milestones that we needed to hit in order to demonstrate the software, the security, and transmit actual data back and forth. In that case, we actually landed on the moon. We're doing another lunar test coming up soon, but then really we'll be focusing on building out the infrastructure near the moon and what's called an L1 orbit. That will be in cislunar space and really provide direct access from that distance to the Earth, really 24/7 a day. So we're looking forward to that. And again, it's a long time coming. I mean, we had a lot of pioneers before us who laid the groundwork for this. But hey, now we're there. The time is right. The technology is there. It is understood. The costs have gone down significantly. And that's how a startup company like Lonestar can actually impact and make an awesome service like this available.
So when are you going to go fully operable? Like, when are you going to commercialize this technology? When are you going to provide services for private and public customers?
Yeah, so we're targeting the end of 2026 timeframe. And then it'll be available for customers. We've already flown customers on previous missions and the upcoming missions, so our government partners have already been testing it and understanding, what it's about. And so the next steps then are about 2 years from today, we should be fully operational, commercially operational, and we're on the path to do that.
Mm-hmm. And about energy, how do you provide energy to those centers? Are you going to, let's say, produce it on the moon, for example, because you have a lot of helium or hydrogen, you can find it there? Or are you going to bring these energy sources to the moon and use them there?
Well, near term, when we have our satellites up in space, so that's all drawing the energy from the sun through solar rays. When we're on the moon, those are different things to figure out. The biggest complication is the lunar night, so you do need battery sources. You need to be able to power things through. There are interesting methods that have been explored. Can't get into all of them right now, but certainly finding areas where you can get natural shielding within the surface of the moon. Those types of landmarks are available. So placing them within shielded areas, number one, and then supplying it with power. A lot of different ways to do that, methodologies that are being explored. But the good news is the service in and of itself can already be done off the surface of the moon, which makes it fully functional, operational for customers in the near term.
So for now, what kind of energy sources are you going to use in 2026?
So that's just driving. So there's some batteries on the satellites themselves, but then you have large solar panels basically that can capture the energy of the sun, and that will provide the power. So we're talking altogether hundreds of petabytes of data that will be stored in space at any given point, can be retrieved rapidly. And again, it's used primarily to back up systems. I mean, In the United States, for example, we've had a lot of recent hacks of data centers, natural disasters that have disrupted coastlines where data centers are hosted. And so if you're in a national security like that, moment like that, or hey, maybe there's a threat in Europe along the borders in Eastern Europe, and one of the first targets are data centers because they, of course, contain a lot of important data that drives the economy. So if you have a major disruption like this, you know that you'll always have a secure backup that you can call up quickly, and again, through an independent network. So you don't have to go through the entire chain of terrestrial networks, even if they degrade or collapse in a certain area, which certainly can happen.
Yeah, and what happens if there is some kind of failure in space in your equipment or infrastructure? Like, you are not going to send technicians, right, to the moon. So who's going to fix these problems?
Right, and certainly those are things to be worked out. But a lot of the software, the encryption updates and things like that can happen from the ground. So you can update, you can fix things actually, oftentimes from the ground in space, sending commands and so forth.
And hardware?
Well, of course, but that's like any satellite. If some hardware goes out, that's it. However, there are some fail-safes built in. Certainly, when protecting the data, deorbiting it, and so forth. It's not going to be your primary source of data. It's going to be a backup source. So there's things that you can do to ensure that if there is a failure, that is properly disposed of.
All right. I will ask about geopolitics, or maybe I should say astropolitics.
Sure.
Yeah, because once you land on the moon and you place your data center there, so are you going to claim this part of the moon is yours, like, I don't know, the settlers in America used to do hundreds of years ago?
Right.
So how can you do this? Is it possible to claim a part of the moon to be yours?
Yeah,
private?
well, it's an interesting question. So most of the development of the moon, based on international treaties, it's meant to do for peaceful purposes. So it doesn't rule out commercial. It's a little murky in terms of ownership. Now, some countries, I'm sure, will look to stake claim to certain areas. And there's some legal arguments to be made and challenged both ways, whether they can do it or not. So it remains murky. Now, with that said, from a commercial operator perspective, we're certainly not trying to claim any part of the moon. And as the moon is available for all humanity, we're able to land on sites and be able to, of course, peacefully set up systems and be able to provide that service. And so by no means would we be inhibiting others from trying to come in the area. Now, with that said, we'll be working closely with our government partner in the U.S. And whatever rules they dictate in terms of who can go where and where we should go, we will certainly work closely with them. But it's an interesting question because there are really no major steadfast laws and rules regulating how you can divvy up the lunar surface.
Yeah, I'm asking because right now we observe a huge competition between the US and China, for example.
Yeah.
So let's imagine a private or not private company, or private with some attachments to the government. Company will send some aircraft or spacecraft to the moon and land there, and let's say, do some interference to your data center. So what's then? Do you, for example, expect the U.S. government to protect your assets?
Yeah, we're getting into the nitty-gritty here. Look, certainly it's...
Sorry, yes, because when we're talking about safety, right, the security of the data, this is an important question, I think.
It is an important question, and to be able to, make sure that no rogue nation comes over there and tries to disrupt it. But that's like anywhere in the Earth too, right? It's a problem that we have on Earth that you equally will have to address in space. But it doesn't mean that it's an unsolvable problem. It also means that you shouldn't try because you know that there could be issues. At the end of the day, a lot of people believe humanity should be an interplanetary species or interlunar species, whatever you want to call it, and be able to explore with the potential of there being outside threats or bad actors or competition even, just getting in your way is something that we have to plan for, certainly. It's no no surprise that a lot of what's driving the funding for the exploration of outer space is coming from competition from China in particular. And in fact, they've staked quite a claim in terms of their exploration on the moon to date. And they're very keen to do things. And I'm sure a lot of that's driven by what they perceive the US and maybe other Western nations doing as well. But with that said, hopefully we can embark on more international collaboration. Maybe people forget, but space was one of the few things during the Cold War that actually brought our nations together. The Soviet Union, the United States, and some of the Western European nations collaborated together in space, and it was actually done so until recently. And so it would be, I think, a better thing to look forward to collaborating than it would be to, locking heads a little bit. But these are things that will have to certainly be worked out and thought through as we go forward.
Right now, I think we observe coercion between China and the US, but also we see cooperation like Artemis Accord. So there are two blocks. So coming to Artemis Accords, is it a part of your business model to also provide infrastructure, digital infrastructure for the countries which are going to take part in this mission and establish, for example, a station on the moon?
Absolutely. So I think the Artemis Accords is a great first step towards international cooperation for exploration of the moon. I know multiple countries have signed up. I don't know what the number is last, maybe like
20-something.
20-something, 30-something.
Poland as well. Yeah.
Poland has signed up, exactly. And it's always a good first step. But at the end of the day, I think it lays out some goals, some guidelines, but it's a piece of paper. So, now is the time, once you sign these pieces of paper and people agree to cooperate, it's like, okay, so how do we go forward? And the answer is it's got to be some kind of, I think, public-private partnership where you have partially the governments, let's say, are putting incentives or plans or programs together, and they're inviting the commercial industries and commercial entities to contribute and to be part of that. And I think that is a good collaboration going forward. And then there will be companies like ours, like Lonestar and others, who are maybe a little more upstart. They may push the envelope a little bit further, but with the guiding principles of Artemis in mind. And so certainly, one big thing is, you need communications around the moon. You need a communications relay if you're going to travel to Mars, and the moon can be a point for that. And certainly with, it seems like every few months a new lunar lander is heading towards the moon. So more and more of these individual missions are going to become collaborative missions, and they're going to see ways to also maybe independent missions, one from India, one from the US, or maybe, one from Poland and one from South America, Argentina or something, will be landing on the moon, and they say, well, wait a minute, okay, we both have our own little purposes, but hey, maybe there's something we do together. And I think having that conversation is what the Artemis Accords is kind of initiated, but now we have to look towards industry, because industry tends to be a little faster than government, to also show a little bit the path that works for industry, that would incentivize industry, and things that we're doing, I think, definitely contribute to that discussion.
All right, I think I will ask you some more about cooperation with countries like Poland later.
Sure.
But now I would like to ask you about the environmental impact that you have on the moon, because we should care not only of our planet, but also we should care about the space as well. So let's imagine, for example, your infrastructure stops working like in 20 years, and what do you do? Are you going to clean this or leave it on the moon? Because you are the first ones to do it, actually. Right. But maybe there will be followers and many companies that would like to do the same. And then we can have a situation when Moon is fully like blocked and trashed with the space debris, right? So what can we do?
Yeah, I mean, a good question. Not easy answer, certainly. But first off, I think one big element of looking at putting data centers in space or even on the surface of the moon is also about the environment, because it's about protecting the Earth's environment first and foremost. Data centers need a lot of space. You need a lot of room. They need a lot of cooling because they generate so much heat. And a lot of them negatively impact everything from CO2 emissions to having a, let's say, not so sustainable impact on the planet. And so I think safeguarding our treasured planet is always #1 goal. And with that said, though, you know, it's like when you go hiking, you always take your trash with you, even if you've, you know, if you consumed whatever it is that you brought with you.
Hopefully we do it.
Hopefully we do it. Hopefully we're good stewards of that. And so likewise in space, I think we put something up there. We should be, you know, have some responsibility for how it's disposed of properly, or recycled or reused. Now, when it comes to our satellites, we have a deorbit plan that actually takes it out of the cislunar orbit altogether. So it'll burn up heading towards the sun, essentially. But once you've landed on the moon, I mean, you know, the moon is, I think it's a valuable resource, but from a impact perspective, I think there's a lot of things you can mitigate it. And I think by the time we're ready to put technology on the moon, like that's more permanent, I mean, there's also going to be ways that you can dispose of it, whether you know, you take it back with you. I mean, that's part of the reusability of rockets. Whether you bury it somewhere in a sustainable manner, or whether you recycle the parts. And that'll be a big part about when you're exploring planets, like when you're going to Mars or you're on a moon. You want to be able to reuse parts. Materials become that much more precious, of course. So I think design will also be made with that in mind. Like disassembly will be just as important as assembly. And then what else could one do with that? And there's always things that could be used.
But do you have an actual plan? How will you do it, or will you just come up with it later?
Well, certainly for the satellite side, which is going to be the next 5 years, we have a plan. When it comes to the lunar side, we have plans as well. But you know, when you're talking about building out a lunar data storage solutions, you're talking, like you said, you're on a 20, 30-year time horizon. So, I mean, you have to keep in mind that sometimes new technologies come on board, but I think recycling, retrieval, like being able to fly to the moon, fly back, and other disposal options on the moon are going to be all part of the plan.
All right. So let's go back to Poland, because you are also at the advisory board of Polish company Satrev.
Right.
So what is your experience with cooperating with Polish companies such as Satrev?
Yeah. So first off, ever since I met the team at Satrev, I've been incredibly impressed with just their passion for space, their technical acumen, and that's really a tribute, I think, to the university system in Poland. It's incredibly strong, and also just that they're showing the organic interest that a lot of Poles now have in space. Poland is a great example, in my view, of what the new space economy is all about. So new space is really about taking advantages of all the experience we have in testing and exploring things that, you know, mostly larger companies spend a lot of money on and did a lot of the R&D work on that. Tested, failed, succeeded, and now you're able to transfer some of that know-how to other smaller countries like Poland, who don't have maybe a huge, robust space economy or budgets that you know, because you had other things to worry about, in fairness to you. So what we're seeing now is that the barriers to entry have come down quite a bit. So startup companies in Poland can now build CubeSats, build satellites for relatively low cost. They can get launch vehicles for relatively low cost. I think that's the most important change and aspect of getting a country off the ground and into kind of the space economy, if you will. And what we've seen now is we've seen a few successful Polish space companies that are not just testing, but they're thriving. They're actually developing a commercial industry, and they're having a lot of success doing that. And yes, they did it off the backs of other technology that came before them. But what's exciting now with the lower cost and the successful tests is, I think now the Polish government says, aha, we have these valuable resources in country. Let's figure out what more we can do. Can we push the bounds of the possible? Can we expand these existing programs? And it's you know, the space economy, it's collaborative, but it's also, I think, it's becoming more native. So, you know, it used to be you needed a space budget, a NASA budget, an ESA budget, whatever, to put a satellite in space. But really, space is about data. I mean, more and more, the commercialization is about just getting data on agriculture, data on, like, you know, where the flood zones, data for infrastructure, data for logistics, data for communications capabilities, Earth observation capabilities, so data from, you know, pixels. And what that means is that why would you outsource that to another country, especially if you could do it yourself? Because you know your country, you know your needs. If you can own and task your satellites, then you have a lot more control about what you can do with that. And so so it's no longer just for space, but data impacts the agriculture industry, the maritime industry, the communications industry. And so budgets shouldn't be constrained because it's in space. It's just another asset that's up there. And I think the Polish government's starting to recognize that it's just another tool that they have, along with maybe aerial shots or ground sensors or whatever, to be able to now use in concert and not just think of it as, oh, it's an astronaut going to space. No, space is a whole other layer of the economy that can support a lot of things that Earth has to do. And the Polish government's waking up to that. That's what I've noticed.
Yeah, so as I understand it, wouldn't be maybe making very sense to, for example, develop our own launching capabilities, but we can develop our other technologies like CubeSats, as you said, or maybe optical devices, or I don't know, moon rovers and this kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah. So where can we be in this, let's say, chain of added value? So how much money, let's say, Poland or companies from Poland can earn on this, taking into consideration that capital is less abundant in Poland. So for sure we won't make as much money as, for example, SpaceX does, right? But where can we be in this space race?
Well, but you could. I mean, again, I think Poland's a leader in Eastern Europe. You have the Three Seas Alliance, for example. So you could do international collaboration with your neighbors. So instead of maybe just having your own constellation of satellites that only looks at Polish farms, for example, collaborate and say, let's go to the Eastern European farms or Western European. It doesn't matter. There's ways to collaborate to where while you may build the technology and build the resources and know-how in country, a satellite's only overhead in low Earth orbit for a very short period of time. And so that's why you need a constellation. If you start maybe building the assets, putting them in space, and then selling the data or sharing the data or collaborating different ways with your neighbors, I think that's a really great way for how not only do your budgets expand, significantly that way, but also now you're actually building a space economy where you may have a few different hubs of expertise in a region. And Eastern Europeans, for example, I know they collaborate a lot together in different ways and trade. You can do the same thing in space. So that's one way. The other thing I think is certainly Poland plays a major role in security.
So not only agriculture and let's say, I don't know, weather forecasting, but also this kind of constellation could help increase our security, right?
Exactly. So, you can do different types of constellation that enhance your security. Data storage, again, that's about enhancing security. You can build, you can have certain kind of surveillance and observation satellites. You can have, remote sensing, detecting heat in different areas, for example. So there's a lot of things that the Polish government could do that would benefit not only itself, its own nation, but also its neighbors and also its alliances, its transatlantic alliances. So it goes back to the influence that Poland has on the US and vice versa. I think a lot of people in America value the Polish partnership and the Polish alliance with the United States. And likewise, the US sees Poland as a friend and in a very important part of the region. So I think Poland really has the ability, you have the know-how, no doubt. You have the right people, you have a strong work ethic, you have incredible technology.
So it's about business model and ideas, right?
And just a willingness to, if I may, I've noticed sometimes in Poland, sometimes there's a little bit of a fear maybe of not succeeding.
Right.
And so I've learned that it's in part sometimes it's a mentality issue. And I think that's the only thing that's really in the way. And so finding the right partners who maybe push you a little bit into, I think being in a partnership is good because you'll feel comfortable, hey, this is a solution we can work towards. But then at the same time, realizing that, hey, we did all this and there's nothing that will stop us from taking it the next level up, And
actually, is a failure something that should block your career or block your development? Because many companies, they failed, like SpaceX, they failed so many times before they launched, for example, Falcon 9, right? And
right.
other rockets.
Yeah, we have a saying, sometimes you have to fail to succeed. So it's okay to have some failures because it's not a failure in the sense that all is lost. It's only a failure in the sense that your objective wasn't met fully. But you have many things that you learn in that process. And so I think test to fail sometimes is a smarter strategy because you'll move forward, you'll learn faster rather than wait to the last minute. You put all your resources around one success, and then if that success doesn't land, then everything goes to naught. So I think it's just a different strategies of approach, and like you said, also a little bit the business model. But Poland should be diving headfirst into the space economy because it will leave you behind. I mean, there are countries, small countries all over the world that are putting up their own satellites, getting their own
Israel,
technology.
for example, and many others like South Korea.
South Korea, Israel, Japan. There are many Latin American countries that are starting to do this, many in the Middle East as well. Europe, of course, many countries in Western Europe have their own system. So it's a matter of, I mean, this is part of the future. You can fight it or you can be part of it.
Yeah, so my last question is about the risk you mentioned, because you know, when you're a startup and not many investors, they trust you and they won't give you much money. So do you think that in this case, I don't know, the state or the government should make some kind of fund that will help startups and take the risk on itself instead of those companies, so take the risk from those companies? And actually, it makes it possible that these companies actually will take this risk and allow themselves to fail sometimes, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just how you manage it. You don't want one pot you don't only want one pot of money in one sector. So I wouldn't only want the government to do it, and I wouldn't only want the VCs and the private equity company, investors to be there either. So having a balance is always good. Government is good, I think, to help subsidize some of the riskier stuff, the R&D, and be that anchor tenant that says, okay, we'll help you, and if you don't succeed, it's okay. Why? Because we're teaching people things, they're learning, they will go off and to join other companies, and that will be human capital investment, no matter what. The VCs, of course, want to see more return, but they also view sometimes, let's invest in these startups because even if this specific idea doesn't work, there's some innovation that could come out of this that could still be worthwhile. A third item, which in fact I was a part of and that I think works to some success in the States, is like doing a hybrid or putting up like a prize money. And so you put a prize in a pot, and basically anybody who can hit that milestone gets the grand prize, tens of millions of US dollars, for example, to go hit a milestone. And at first, people dismissed the prize idea because they thought, well, if there's no money up front, they won't do it. But a lot of people were motivated by the end result. So you can test different things out, and that's what I would recommend doing, and just getting creative with it.
Thank you, sir, for this interesting interview, all your advices, and sharing your broad knowledge with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I was interviewing Steve Eisele, the president of Lonestar Data Holdings, a company which is going to set data centers on the moon and in space in general. Many thanks to our viewer. Thank you very much.